Leah, given the fraught political atmosphere surrounding the win of Bongbong Marcos during the elections in 2022, why do you feel it's important being part of this project?
I feel anything that gets to illuminate parts of our history, I feel that that's always important, even if it's an ugly part of history, even if it's a part of history that is fraught with heartbreak and pain and bad memories. I mean, everyone's going to have a different experience of martial law. Everyone is going to have a different level of experience with EDSA. What I remember from the EDSA revolution was this feeling of catharsis on the part of a lot of people and hope. But what is happening in the present, it may not always be connected to what happened in the past. Because remember, there is, like, EDSA revolution is 1985, Bongbong Marcos's win is 2022. There's a lot of stuff that happened in between. So, we have to look at that too. We can't just be like isolating Here Lies Love, which is this chunk of Filipino history. We can look at it, take lessons from it, move forward from it, look at it and see what mistakes may have been made and then see what happens from there. But I mean, there are people who have said, if this man is doing right by the country, then okay. Then I really cannot criticize at this moment in time. But we have this show, and it's a part of history that is part of the DNA of a lot of our people. And I think I'm part of it to share what we remember, and hopefully for people not to forget.
Being that the Marcoses are a very contentious sort of characters, and a lot of people say that the show musical aggrandizes them. What is your reply to that criticism?
It's very interesting that when we did the show before, people were criticizing the show for attacking the Marcoses, and now it's turned around and people who haven't seen the show yet are criticizing the show for maybe glamorizing the Marcoses. There's a certain amount of truth to it. In my understanding, the Marcoses were a glamorous couple. The Philippine people were thrilled to be represented by this glamorous couple who impressed the whole world. And in a way, the Philippine people were seduced in this way. So before martial law, and then the Philippine people are in some ways very much betrayed by these people when they go to the dark side. I want the audience to have that same experience, that they also feel seduced. They feel, oh, isn't this wonderful? Look how beautiful they are. Look how pretty and how wonderful this is. And then they feel like, whoa, hey, we got tricked. So if you only take a slice of the show, you don't get the whole story.
David, one last question. For people that think about this time in history, being that Bongbong Marcos, the son of Ferdinand, is now president, how do you feel that the show is even more relevant today than when you first did this many years ago?
I don't know enough. We have a very enthusiastic cast. I don't know enough about Bongbong or his policies or what's going on to make any criticisms. I think it's too early. Yeah, there's the reaction right there. Thank you. Yeah, but I would say, looking around the world, we see like democracy under threat in lots of places all over the world. And in that way, it's very current and very relevant.
Hi, Ariel.
Hello.
You play Imelda Marcos, such a heavy historical background of a character. How are you preparing? What kind of research is going into playing this sort of magnitude of this role?
There is a lot of information about Imelda Marcos, and a lot of it was put out by the Marcos regime, and a lot of it is told by primary sources and people who were affected by the Marcoses. Right now, I'm very fortunate that the company of Here Lies Love is providing the whole cast with a whole bunch of information that's coming from primary sources. So we are able to figure out where is the true information, where is disinformation, and to figure out for ourselves what's going to be helpful in telling this story as accurately as possible.
We want to ask you, you both play such heavy historical characters. Ninoy Aquino, Ferdinand Marcos. What is the research that goes into playing a role of this magnitude?
Watching every piece of footage that Ninoy has available. He was videotaped a lot during his lifetime. Watching and rewatching that. Currently, I'm reading his book, Testament from a Prison Cell, that he wrote during the 7 years that he was imprisoned. And just consuming everything that he has written, every piece of footage that's available, and letting that into my skin and bones, and then performing it every night.
What about you?
Small task.
Yeah.
Huge task, Conrad. Ikaw.
Okay, so the challenge of researching President Ferdinand Marcos is that so much of the written history of him is not true, and so much of the recorded history of I've had to do as much research on who wrote the piece of history that I'm reading to make sure who was this person in that world. Are these truths invented? Was it something? And also even Marcos's personal diary that he wrote. He wrote things in there that were false because he changed dates because he was obsessed with the number 7, and knowing that his journal was going to be read in the future, he would change things to make it look better for him. And even to this day, his war stories of his valor are very much in question. So I mean, I think that is what our purpose of our show has been, is to bring reinformation out and try to tell the truth of what happened and the truth of who these people are, and the bad choices that they made, so that we can hold them accountable for history. And so that the people who come to the show, particularly the Pinoys, to come to the show and say, what do we believe? Well, it's well, empower yourself to do your research and find out what you believe based on the truth that you look for yourself, and then make your choices from that.
We are with Clint Ramos, the lead producer and costume designer of Here Lies Love. I'm also the community and cultural liaison for the show.
Producer, yes.
Clint, can you tell us about the evolution from starting with the show so many, many years ago to now being one of the lead producers?
Yeah. So I just got out of grad school. Jessica Hagedorn, our very celebrated, Filipino American playwright and novelist, introduced me to David Byrne. And I didn't know it was David. She just said, show up at the studio in Soho. And, and then so I go up and I meet David Byrne, and he said, hey, I'm writing this, I don't know what it is going to be, but I wrote a couple of songs, and it's about Imelda Marcos, right? And I asked him why he was, interested in her, and he had been, doing this kind of studies of these rulers all over the world. And, as we know, David is such a global kind of artist. He sent me 2 CDs of songs that he recorded himself. So all of the tracks he sang through. And I know I listened to it, and I remember that it felt familiar, and I just realized that what David had done was actually kind of collate these words from from all of these Filipinos, and kind of arrange them into these songs, and that's why they seemed familiar. Even sort of the syntax was kind of done in Filipino English, and I was fascinated, but I also kind of really it was very emotional for me hearing it because it made me reckon with our own history, right? I think being an immigrant, you kind of put all of that history, some of it on the shelf, right? And you sort of really focus on immersing yourself in American life. And I think that is the gift that this show has given me, was this sort of almost like perennial reckoning with our history. My relationship with that regime, my relationship with fighting against that regime, my relationship as just being Filipino growing up in martial law, all of that. And so, he said, if you want to hang out in the studio and do a couple of costume sketches, maybe, we'll do that. And so that's what I did. And after...
And fast forward now, you're a lead producer for the show.
Fast forward now, we premiered at the public in 2013, and now I'm lead producing the show. And it feels full circle, but it also feels like, for Jose Antonio Vargas and I, it feels like we are really, wrapping this with our arms and making sure that the Filipino agenda does not get lost, right? Because as we know, the Filipino agenda, the Filipino experience is broad. It is multi-layered. It is nuanced. There are so many ways to be Filipino and to be proud to be Filipino. And we are happy to be being part of this Filipino renaissance that's happening globally.